One of the core principles of the Magnuson-Stevens Act that has helped end overfishing and set many depleted fisheries on a path to rebuilding is the requirement of fisheries management councils to set annual catch limits based on the best available science. It's worked. After decades of fishery failures brought about by, well, various kinds of decision-making, often politically driven, in '96 and in 2007, the reauthorizations have made the United States a globally recognized leader in science-based fisheries management. The catch limits have been set for all applicable federal fisheries comprised of hundreds of stocks. Accountability measures have been put in place to ensure that fishermen stay within the limits. Again, as based on the best scientific information available. The framework has proved successful. For example, since 2006, the percentage of federal stocks subject to overfishing has dropped from about 20% of fishing stocks with known overfishing status to less than 10%. Now, of course, there were some people who said at the time of these previous reauthorizations that, well, surely the fishing practitioners, the fishermen themselves know more than the scientists. We should let them do it without these catch shares. I think there are more and more believers now that the catch shares approach works, that the science makes a difference. Unfortunately, H.R. 4742 moves us in the wrong direction by attempting to create broad new exceptions so that managers can avoid having to set these science-based catch limits. Specifically, the bill would establish a new definition of ecosystem component species that is much broader than the current regulations, and it would exempt a number of so-called non-target species from the catch limits. Some of those exempted species are indeed subject to overfishing, and they are important to the ecology of the system, to the habitat. They provide the food for critical species, and so they should be included, I think, in the scientific management. My amendment would strike the provisions of the bill that create new exceptions to the annual catch limits, and it would retain the Stevenson Act, the Magnuson-Stevens Act existing language, and it would retain the regulatory guidance. In other words, it would remain somewhat stringent because we've seen that that works. Numerous attempts in the bill to provide flexibility to fisheries managers actually would result in certain species not being subject to catch limits, being overfished, with the ecology, the balance, the habitat upset, and a resulting decline in species. For example, just to give you one example, Atlantic haddock. Because this stock has been so overfished in the past, it's not a commercially viable species. So it would be called bycatch now. Would probably not be included in annual catch limits. Well, that means it will never recover. It would be outside of the Magnuson-Stevens limits. The language, I think, would also allow open-ended excuses with no timelines for rebuilding depleted fish populations. For all of those reasons, my amendment would strike some language on page 8 and on page 9 to stay with what works, what has been demonstrated to work. And so I ask approval of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.